Mama, where did the man go? Amara's whispered question pierced through Elena Torres like a blade, her 6-year-old daughter's confusion echoing through the cathedral, where 300 guests sat in stunned silence. Elena gripped her bouquet tighter, her knuckles white against the ivory roses. As she stared at the empty space where Marcus should have been standing, Father Lopez cleared his throat nervously. Perhaps we— The voice came from the third pew, deep and authoritative. A tall man in an expensive charcoal suit stood slowly, his silver-touched dark hair and commanding presence drawing every eye in the cathedral. Elena had noticed him during the processional. He seemed out of place among Marcus's co-workers and her small family, carrying himself with the confidence of wealth and power. Lorenzo Vitale moved down the aisle with purpose, his Italian leather shoes silent on marble. The congregation held its breath. "Forgive the interruption," he said, his slight accent lending gravity to his words, "but this lady deserves better than public humiliation." He stopped before Elena, and she found herself looking into eyes the color of winter storms. Up close, she could see the expensive cut of his suit, the platinum watch, the kind of understated luxury that spoke of serious money, but it was his expression that caught her, not pity, but recognition, pain recognizing pain. "I'm Lorenzo Vitale," he said, extending his hand. "I have a proposition for you." Elena stared at him. "A proposition? Marry me instead." His voice was calm, certain. "Right here, right now." The cathedral erupted in gasps and whispers, but Lorenzo's gaze never wavered. "You don't know me," Elena whispered. "I know enough. I know you're strong. You raised a beautiful daughter alone. I know you're brave. You risked your heart again after losing your husband. I know you deserve to walk out of here with dignity, not as a victim of someone else's cowardice." Amara, who had been silent throughout the chaos, suddenly tugged Elena's dress. When Elena looked down, her daughter's dark eyes were fixed on Lorenzo with startling intensity. "He's sad like us, Mama," Amara said quietly, "but his eyes got brighter when he looked at you." Elena's breath caught. Amara hadn't spoken this clearly in months, not since the accident that killed her father, and she was right. Something in this stranger's expression was shifting, darkness giving way to something hopeful. "Why?" Elena asked him. "Why would you do this?" Lorenzo's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Because 3 years ago, I lost my wife and unborn daughter in childbirth. I've been existing, not living. But when I saw you standing here, refusing to break despite everything, you reminded me what courage looks like, what love looks like." He paused, including Amara in his gaze. "I've been waiting my whole life to find my family. I think I just did." The words hung in the air like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Elena thought of all the nights she'd lain awake, wondering if she'd ever feel safe again, if Amara would ever heal, if either of them would stop feeling like broken remnants of their former selves. This stranger was offering them more than rescue. He was offering them hope. "Yes," she breathed, placing her hand in his. "Yes, I'll marry you." When their fingers interlocked, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 years, not just hope for survival, but hope for something beautiful. As Lorenzo lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, she realized this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Chapter 2. Silent Prayers Answered. 2 hours later, Judge Margaret Hensley performed the brief civil ceremony that transformed Elena Torres into Elena Vitale. The courthouse felt strangely intimate after the cathedral's chaos, with only a court clerk as witness and Amara standing between them, her small hand alternating between gripping Elena's dress and touching Lorenzo's jacket. "Do you, Lorenzo Matteo Vitale, take Elena Sofia Torres?" When Judge Hensley asked for vows, Lorenzo spoke with quiet conviction. "Elena, I promise to protect you and Amara, to earn your trust, and to build something real from this moment of faith." Elena's voice shook. "Lorenzo, I promise to trust in this impossible leap, to bring warmth to your life, and to try to build a home filled with hope." Their kiss was gentle, respectful, a promise rather than passion. After the ceremony, Lorenzo knelt to Amara's level. "Would it be all right if I hugged you?" "I'd like to hug my new daughter." Amara studied him with the intensity children reserved for important decisions, then stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his neck, whispering something only he could hear. Whatever she said made his eyes fill with tears. The drive to Lorenzo's home was quiet, except for Amara's occasional questions about the luxury car's features. Elena studied this man she had just married. The careful way he drove, how he automatically adjusted the air conditioning when he noticed her shivering, the classical music he'd chosen, that seemed designed to soothe rather than impress. His house was Impressivia lakefront estate, with manicured gardens and floor-to-ceiling windows, but walking through the elegant rooms, Elena sensed something missing. For all its beauty, the house felt lonely. "Mrs. Harper, my housekeeper, has weekends off," Lorenzo explained, leading them to a kitchen that belonged in a magazine. "I hope you don't mind if I cook tonight." "Can I help?" Elena asked, feeling out of place. "Tell me about yourselves," he said, moving around the kitchen with practiced ease as he prepared grilled cheese sandwiches. "I'd like to know who my wife is." The word wife sent an unexpected flutter through her. This was temporary. She reminded herself kindness from a stranger. Nothing more. "I'm a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital," she said, settling Amara at the kitchen island, where she could color in a book Lorenzo had somehow produced from thin air. "Or I was, until they had to cut my hours because of budget constraints. I've been picking up shifts at a clinic downtown, but it's barely enough to cover rent and—" She trailed off, realizing how pathetic her life sounded when spoken aloud. "And Amara's father?" Lorenzo asked gently, not looking up from the stove where 3 grilled cheese sandwiches sizzled in a pan. "Car accident 2 years ago," Elena said simply. "Drunk driver ran a red light. Miguel died on impact, but Amara was in the back seat." She saw everything. Lorenzo's hand stilled for just a moment before he continued cooking. "I'm sorry. Losing someone you love. There are no words." There was something in his voice that made Elena look at him more closely. "You sound like you speak from experience." He was quiet for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, as he plated their sandwiches with the care of a man who understood that even simple meals could be acts of love, he spoke. "My wife, Valentina, and our daughter Lucia died 3 years ago, complications during childbirth. I lost them both in the same moment." The words hung in the air like a prayer, like a confession, like a shared understanding of what it meant to have your heart ripped from your chest and still somehow keep breathing. "Oh, Lorenzo," Elena whispered, her own pain suddenly feeling less isolating. "I'm so sorry." "Lucia would have been almost Amara's age now," he continued, setting a plate in front of each of them. "When I saw you both today, standing there so brave and so broken, I saw what my family should have looked like. What I've been praying for without even realizing I was praying." Amara looked up from her coloring, her dark eyes moving between the 2 adults, as if she could sense the weight of what was being shared. Then she did something that made both Elena and Lorenzo freeze. She reached into her small, pursy, tiny white beaded bag that had been her something new for the wedding and pulled out a small photograph. It was wrinkled and worn from being carried everywhere, showing a younger Elena and a handsome black man holding a baby Amara between them. All 3 of them laughing at something outside the frame. "This is my daddy," she said quietly, placing the photo carefully on the counter where Lorenzo could see it. He was really good at making people laugh. "Mama says he would want me to be happy again." Lorenzo picked up the photograph with hands that trembled slightly, studying the faces of the family that had been torn apart by tragedy. "He looks like he was a wonderful father," he said finally, "and he's right. He would want you to be happy." Then Amara did something that shattered every defense Elena had tried to build around her heart. She took the photograph and held it out to Lorenzo. "You can keep this," she said solemnly, "so you can ask him if it's okay for you to be my new daddy." Lorenzo's breath caught audibly, and when he looked at Elena, she saw that his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Amara, that's very special." "Are you sure?" The little girl nodded seriously. "Mama talks to Daddy sometimes when she thinks I'm sleeping. She asks him to help us not be so sad anymore. Maybe he sent you." Elena felt her own tears threatening to spill over. In all her prayers, in all her desperate whispered conversations with Miguel's memory, she had never imagined an answer like this. She had never imagined that healing could come in the form of a stranger, with kind eyes, and a heart as broken as her own. "Maybe he did," Lorenzo said softly, carefully placing the photograph in his wallet. "Maybe they both did. Your daddy and my Valentina, Maybe they knew we were all meant to find each other. As they ate their simple dinner in the enormous kitchen, something shifted in the space between them. Not love, not yet, but recognition, understanding, the beginning of something that might someday grow into the family they had all lost and desperately needed to find again. And when Amara fell asleep, curled up between them on the massive living room sofa, her head on Elena's lap, and her small hand clutching Lorenzo's finger, Elena allowed herself to believe for the first time in 2 years that maybe, just maybe, they were exactly where they were supposed to be. Chapter 3. The Language of Healing. 6 weeks into their unconventional marriage, Elena discovered that Lorenzo had been quietly working with Amara on something special. She found them in the kitchen one Saturday morning, Amara giggling as Lorenzo's hands moved in slow, deliberate gestures. They were practicing basic sign language, just simple words like good morning and thank you, but Amara's face glowed with the excitement of learning something new. "I learned this in college," Lorenzo explained when Elena joined them. "My roommate was deaf. I thought it might help Amara express herself when speaking feels too hard." It was brilliant, really. Since the accident, Amara often struggled to find words for her feelings, but with her hands, she could communicate without the vulnerability that speaking sometimes required. "Will you teach me too?" Elena asked, and the smile that spread across Lorenzo's face told her this had been his hope all along. Over the following weeks, their home filled with a new kind of conversation, simple signs at first. "Please, thank you, I love you," but gradually expanding as Amara's confidence grew. She began expressing thoughts that had been locked away since the accident, her hands moving with increasing fluency. Elena found the visual language surprisingly natural. Her medical training had given her good hand coordination, but more than that, signing required complete attention. When they communicated this way, they had to face each other, maintain eye contact, be fully present. "You're learning quickly." Lorenzo signed to her one evening after Amara had gone to bed. They sat on opposite ends of the sofa, practicing their new vocabulary. "You're a patient teacher," Elena signed back, marveling at how the movements were becoming second nature. "I want to tell you something," Lorenzo continued, his expression growing serious. "Something I haven't said before." Elena's pulse quickened. "What?" "I didn't marry you just to save you from embarrassment." He signed carefully. "I married you because when I saw you that day, refusing to break in front of everyone, staying strong for Amara, I recognized something I thought I'd lost forever." "What?" Elena asked, though she wasn't sure she was ready for his answer. "Hope," he replied simply. "For the first time since Valentina and Lucia died, I looked at someone and thought, that woman could teach me how to live again." Elena felt something shift in her chest. "I'm still healing," she signed honestly. "So am I," Lorenzo replied, "but maybe we can heal together." Before Elena could respond, they heard small footsteps. Amara appeared in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "I had a bad dream," she signed. The movements now as natural as speech for her. Without hesitation, both adults opened their arms. Amara ran to them, climbing onto the sofa between them as they held her. Elena became aware of Lorenzo's arm around them both. How naturally they fit together. "What was your dream?" Elena signed. "I dreamed you, and Papa Lorenzo went away like Daddy did." Amara's hands shook slightly. "I was alone again." Lorenzo's arm tightened around them. "That will never happen." He signed with quiet conviction. "We're your family now, forever." "Promise?" Amara asked, looking between them. "Promise." They signed together. As they sat in the lamplight, Amara gradually relaxing back to sleep, Elena realized they had become something she hadn't dared hope for, not just a marriage of convenience, but a real family. For the first time since Miguel's death, she allowed herself to imagine being truly happy again. Chapter 4. When Hearts Remember How to Hope. 1 month after their wedding, Elena discovered Lorenzo's secret. She hadn't meant to follow him when he left the house every Thursday evening, claiming he had business to attend to. But the way he returned home each week told a story she couldn't ignore, not physical exhaustion, but the emotional drain that came from giving pieces of your heart away. There were other signs. The distant smile at dinner afterward, how he'd hug Amara longer on Thursday nights, as if she reminded him of something precious, the small notebook in his jacket pocket filled with careful notes written in his precise handwriting. Elena had learned to read people during her nursing years when a parent was about to break, when a child was hiding pain, when everything was about to change. Her instincts screamed that Lorenzo's Thursday evenings involved something deeply personal, something that both drained and restored him. When Mrs. Harper offered to stay late with Amara, teaching her traditional dumpling making, Elena made her choice. She would follow her husband. The drive through downtown gave her too much time to think. Each mile brought fresh anxiety mixed with something that felt dangerously close to jealousy. Was he meeting someone? An old girlfriend connected to his late wife? The thought twisted her stomach with an emotion she had no right to feel. They were married for practical reasons, after all. But then she remembered how he looked at her sometimes when he thought she wasn't watching, like she was miraculous. Something he couldn't quite believe was real. The way he unconsciously reached for her hand when they walked together, only to pull back as if remembering their arrangement. The reverent softness in his voice when he said her name. Maybe this wasn't about romantic secrets at all. She expected him to pull into some gleaming office building. Instead, he stopped at Children's Hospital, her former workplace, where she had spent 7 years learning that healing sometimes required breaking your own heart repeatedly. Elena sat in her car, staring at the familiar building where she had fought so many battles, celebrated victories, mourned losses. She had loved working there, found purpose in being the steady presence children and parents could rely on during their darkest hours. The emotional toll had been enormous, especially as a single mother balancing her own child's needs with her young patient's overwhelming needs. Watching Lorenzo disappear through those glass doors with his canvas bag, moving with practiced familiarity, understanding hit her like a physical blow. Not another woman, children. The need to know overwhelmed her professional boundaries. She called Sofia Torres, her former colleague and friend. "Elena, what's wrong?" Sofia's voice came through immediately. "I need to get inside. It's about my husband, Lorenzo Vitale. I think he's been coming here, and I need to understand why." 20 minutes later, Sofia met her at the security desk. One look at Elena's face told her everything she needed to know. "Jim, this is Elena Torres. She used to work pediatric. She's with me tonight." The elevator Lorenzo had taken went to the 7th floor pediatric oncology, the ward housing, the hospital's youngest and bravest fighters. Elena knew it intimately. She'd floated there many times, and it was simultaneously the most heartbreaking and most inspiring place she'd ever worked. What she found when she reached the 7th floor stopped her heart. Lorenzo sat in the center of the ward's common room, surrounded by children in wheelchairs and on portable IV stands. Some were bald from chemotherapy. Others wore colorful headscarves or baseball caps. In his hands was a worn copy of The Lion, The Witch and the Wardrobe, his deep voice bringing Narnia to life as a dozen young faces hung on every word. The scene was achingly beautiful. This powerful man who commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar decisions sat cross-legged on a child-sized chair, completely absorbed in C.S. Lewis's magic for children who needed magic more than most. And then Aslan breathed on the statues. Lorenzo read, his voice dropping to a whisper that had every child leaning forward, and they came to life, one by one, until the whole courtyard was filled with living, breathing creatures who had been trapped in stone. A little boy, maybe 8, thin and pale but with blazing, intelligent eyes, raised his hand. Elena could see the port in his chest where chemotherapy was administered, could recognize the particular exhaustion that came from fighting battles no child should face, but his voice was strong when he spoke. "Mr. Lorenzo, do you think people can come back to life too? Not just in stories, but in real life?" The question hung heavy with a child's profound grappling with mortality. Elena held her breath, wondering how Lorenzo would navigate such depths. He closed the book gently and looked at the boy with tender respect, no condescension, no deflection. He was treating this child's question with the gravity it deserved. "I think, Ethan, that there are different kinds of coming back to life. Sometimes our bodies heal, sometimes our hearts heal, sometimes both. But the most important thing is never stopping belief in magic, the magic of hope, of love, of tomorrow being better than today." "Is that what happened to you?" asked a little girl with a bright purple butterfly headscarf, her voice soft but determined. "Did you come back to life?" Elena watched Lorenzo's careful composure, give way to something raw and honest. His smile wasn't the polished expression from business functions, but something genuine and vulnerable that made her chest tight. Yes, Lily. Very recently, I came back to life. A beautiful woman and her daughter reminded me that hearts can heal, even when we think they're broken forever. Elena pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from making a sound. He was talking about them. About her and Amara. Will you tell us about them? Ethan asked, echoed by eager voices. Will you make it a story? Added Lily, like the ones in the books? Well, Lorenzo said, settling back as if he had all the time in the world, eyes twinkling. There once was a princess who was also a healer. She helped sick children get better, just like your doctors and nurses do here. And she had a little girl who was as brave as any knight, even though she had been through scary things. As Lorenzo wove their story into a fairy tale-leth, princess who stood strong when her heart was breaking, the little knight who learned to speak with her hands when words were too hard, the lonely king who found his family when he least expected it, Elena understood where he went every Thursday, what he did with his free time, his wealth, his carefully guarded heart. He loved these children, and they loved him back. She could see it in how they responded, not as a wealthy benefactor or important adult, but as someone who genuinely cared about their thoughts, feelings, and dreams. He knew their names, their stories, their fears, and hopes. When a little girl interrupted, asking if the Princess Knight would get better soon, Lorenzo paused to assure her that some battles took time, but having people who loved you made you stronger for the fight. And did the king and the princess live happily ever after? Asked a boy whose wheelchair was decorated with superhero stickers. Well, Noah, Lorenzo said with a smile, equal parts mischief and hope. They're still writing that part of the story. But I have a feeling it's going to be pretty wonderful. Elena slipped away before being discovered, but she couldn't escape what she'd witnessed. A man who'd lost everything choosing to love children he might lose again. Not charity courage. The drive home blurred with tears and revelation. She had thought she understood Lorenzo, successful businessman, grieving widower, man seeking family to fill empty spaces. Tonight revealed layers she hadn't suspected. This wasn't traditional charity, the hands-off giving wealthy people often did for social standing. This was personal, intimate, costly, in ways having nothing to do with money. Lorenzo showed up week after week, allowing himself to love children he might lose, investing his heart in relationships that could break it again. 2 years he'd been doing this. For 2 years, through his own darkest grief, somehow finding strength to be light for others when his world had gone dark. At home, she waited. When Lorenzo arrived, looking tired but peaceful, that familiar expression she now understood, she chose directness. Subtlety had never been her strength, and tonight felt too important for games. I followed you tonight, she said as they settled on the back terrace, the lake stretching like a star-reflecting mirror. Lorenzo went completely still, wine glass halfway to his lips. I see. Why didn't you tell me you read to children with cancer every Thursday? He set down his glass, hands clasping and unclasping. When he finally looked at her, his expression was vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. Because I didn't want you to think I was trying to impress you, he said finally. What I do there, it's selfish, really. Selfish? Elena couldn't hide her disbelief. How is spending Thursday evenings with sick children selfish? Those children face their mortality every day, Lorenzo said, voice rough with emotion. They know things most adults spend their whole lives avoiding. And somehow, they still laugh, still dream, still believe in happy endings. Being with them reminds me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing hope despite the fear. He turned to face her fully, and in the moonlight, she could see tears tracking down his cheeks. After I lost Valentina and Lucia, I stopped believing in happy endings. I thought my story was over at 35, that I would spend the rest of my life going through motions. Those kids taught me that every day you get to love someone is a gift, even if you might lose them specially. Then Elena felt her breath catch at his raw honesty, the pain and hard-won wisdom in his words. Is that what you're doing with us? She asked quietly. Living each day like it's a gift? Yes, he said simply, the word hanging between them like a vow. Every morning I wake up and hear Amara laughing in the kitchen. Every evening when you fall asleep reading on the couch and I cover you with a blanket. Every moment when you look at me like I might be worthy of your trust. It's all a gift I never thought I'd receive again." Ethan asked if people can come back to life, Elena said, remembering the little boy's profound question. "What did you think of my answer?" "I think you gave him hope," Elena said. "But I want to know your real answer. The one you didn't say in front of the children." Lorenzo met her eyes, and she saw everything he had been hiding, all the love and fear and desperate hope he had been afraid to acknowledge. "My answer is that I was dead for 3 years, and then I met you and Amara. Suddenly, I remembered what it felt like to wake up looking forward to the day instead of just trying to survive it." Standing in the moonlight, listening to gentle water lapping the shore and distant sounds of Amara playing upstairs, Elena felt something shift inside her, not just gratitude or comfort, but something warmer, deeper. Something that made her want to step closer instead of maintaining careful distance. "What if the reasons we married weren't wrong?" she whispered, moving toward him across the terrace. "What if they were exactly right, just not in the way we thought?" When she reached up to touch his face, Lorenzo closed his eyes as if her touch was something he'd yearned for but hadn't dared hope for. "Elena," he breathed, her name a prayer on his lips. "I used to think love was supposed to be easy," she said, her thumb tracing his cheekbone, marveling at how he leaned into her touch like a man starved for gentleness, safe and predictable and without risk. "But watching you with those children tonight, seeing how you love them despite knowing how fragile their lives are." She paused, gathering courage. Maybe the best kind of love requires bravery. Maybe it requires choosing to love, even when you know it might hurt. "Are you feeling brave tonight?" he asked softly, hands covering hers where they rested against his face. Elena thought about everything that had led them here, the worst day of her life, somehow becoming the first day of something beautiful, how Amara had bloomed under Lorenzo's patient care, how her own heart had begun hoping again, despite every reason to protect it. She thought about the children on the 7th floor, fighting battles they shouldn't have to fight. Still choosing hope and joy and love, despite uncertainty. If they could be that brave, maybe she could too. "Yes," she whispered, "I think I am." When Lorenzo kissed her, really kissed her this time, not the careful, tentative brush from their courthouse wedding, Elena kissed him back with all the hope she'd been afraid to acknowledge, all the love she'd been too scared to admit, all the dreams she'd thought lost forever. His hands tangled in her hair, and she could taste salt on his lips from tears she wasn't sure were his or hers. This wasn't the desperate passion of people trying to forget pain, but something deeper, the careful, reverent love of people who had learned that every moment of happiness was precious, that every chance to love and be loved was a miracle not to be wasted. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lorenzo rested his forehead against hers and smiled through his tears. "I love you," he said simply, as if the words had been waiting inside him for months, waiting for this moment when it was finally safe to let them out. "I love your strength, your kindness, the way you love Amara with your whole heart. I love how you see the best in people, how you fight for what matters, how you make me believe in second chances." "I love you too," Elena whispered back, the words feeling like coming home after a long, difficult journey. "I love your gentleness, your generosity, the way you give pieces of your heart to children who need hope. I love how you make us feel safe, how you've given us a real home, how you love Amara like she's your own." Standing there, with moonlight dancing on the lake and Amara's laughter drifting from inside the house, Elena understood what Lorenzo had been trying to tell her, what those brave children had taught him about living and loving and choosing hope. Sometimes, coming back to life meant having the courage to love again. Even knowing love always carried the risk of loss. Sometimes, it meant believing that the people who found you in your darkest moments might be exactly the people you were meant to find all along. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave, that courage was rewarded with something even more beautiful than what you'd lost, not a replacement, but a new beginning, to a second chance at the kind of love that made everything else worthwhile. As they stood holding each other under the stars, Elena knew tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fears to face and overcome. But tonight, in this moment, surrounded by love and hope, and the promise of all the tomorrows they would write together, she felt truly alive for the first time in years. And in the distance, barely audible over the sound of water and wind and their own hearts beating in time. She could swear she heard the sound of children laughing, Ethan and Lily and Noah and all the other brave souls on the 7th floor, choosing joy despite uncertainty, teaching the adults around them that love, always and forever, was worth the risk. Chapter 5. The First I Love You. The Saturday morning of their family picnic dawned crisp and golden, with the kind of autumn light that made everything look like it had been touched by magic. Lorenzo had suggested the outing the night before, after finding Elena staring wistfully out the kitchen window at the lake that sparkled behind their home. "I used to dream about family picnics when I was little," she had confessed, leaning against the counter as he cleaned up after dinner. "My father always promised we'd have them when I was older, but there never seemed to be enough time, enough money, enough peace." "Then let's have one tomorrow," Lorenzo had said simply, as if creating childhood dreams was the easiest thing in the world. "The grounds here are perfect for it, and I happen to know that Amara has been wanting to try out those sketching supplies we bought her." Now, watching him load a wicker basket that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread about perfect family moments, Elena felt that familiar flutter of disbelief that this was actually her life. 3 months ago, she had been struggling to make rent on a cramped apartment, working double shifts just to keep food on the table, wondering if she and Amara would ever feel safe again. Today, she was married to a man who packed gourmet sandwiches and fresh strawberries with the same care he brought to multi-million-dollar business deals, who had remembered that Amara preferred her juice boxes frozen so they'd stay cold longer, who had somehow acquired a kite shaped like a butterfly because he'd noticed her daughter's fascination with anything that could fly. The morning air carried the scent of fallen leaves and the distant sound of geese honking as they flew south for the winter. Elena pulled her cardigan tighter around herself, but not from cold, from the overwhelming sense of contentment that threatened to spill over into tears. She had spent so many years bracing for the next catastrophe that this peaceful happiness felt almost surreal. "Are you ready for our adventure, little artist?" Lorenzo asked Amara, who was practically vibrating with excitement in her new sundress, yellow with tiny sunflowers, perfect for the golden morning. Amara nodded enthusiastically, clutching her new sketch pad and the set of colored pencils that Lorenzo had presented to her the week before. Since the accident that took her father, words had become too heavy for her small heart to carry, but her eyes sparkled with anticipation, and she tugged on Lorenzo's hand, with the trust that had grown between them over these precious months. Elena watched the interaction with wonder. Lorenzo had never once tried to force Amara to speak, never acted like her silence was something that needed fixing. Instead, he had learned to communicate in the language she could manage: gentle touches, shared glances, and the sign language he had taught himself, and then patiently taught to Elena. As they walked toward the picnic spot, Amara suddenly stopped and pointed to the lake, then made the sign for beautiful that Lorenzo had taught her. He smiled and signed back, "Just like you, little one." The picnic spot Lorenzo had chosen was a secluded meadow overlooking the lake, surrounded by trees whose leaves had turned every shade of gold and red imaginable. He spread out a blanket that was large enough for a family of 10, then began unpacking their feast with the systematic efficiency of someone who had clearly put a lot of thought into every detail. "How did you know?" Elena asked, watching him pull out not just food but games and books and even a small speaker for soft music. There were cloth napkins instead of paper ones, real glasses instead of plastic cups. And somehow, he had even managed to pack fresh flowers in a small vase. "How did you know exactly what we needed?" Lorenzo paused in his unpacking, a container of fresh fruit salad in his hands, and looked at her with an expression that was both vulnerable and determined. "Because I've been dreaming about this too," he said simply. "Maybe not picnics specifically, but family moments, real ones, the kind where everyone is happy and safe and no one is looking over their shoulder waiting for the next disaster." He set down the fruit salad and reached for her hands, his thumb brushing over her wedding ring, the simple gold band he had slipped onto her finger in that courthouse ceremony that had felt more like a business transaction than a wedding. "Valentina and I, we used to talk about the family we'd have someday: Sunday morning pancakes, bedtime stories, teaching our children to ride bikes and tying their shoes, and all those ordinary, beautiful moments that make up a life together." His voice grew thick with emotion. "I never thought I'd get a second chance at that. I never thought I'd want one. But watching you with Amara, seeing how you pour everything you have into loving her, protecting her, giving her the childhood she deserves despite everything you've both been through." He shook his head, wonder clear in his voice. "You've made me believe in family again, Elena, in love, in the possibility that broken people can find healing together." Elena felt tears spill over her cheeks before she could stop them. "Lorenzo," she whispered, using the name that had become hers alone to say, "I'm so scared." "Of what, amore mio?" The endearment slipped out in Italian, and somehow, hearing him call her my love in his grandmother's language, made it feel even more precious. "Of this being too good to be true, of you realizing that we're more trouble than we're worth, of Amara getting too attached and then losing another father figure." She wiped her eyes with shaking hands. "Of letting myself fall completely in love with you, and then having my heart broken all over again." "Elena." He cupped her face in his hands with infinite gentleness. "Look at me, beautiful girl." She met his eyes, those dark eyes that held such warmth and certainty. "I'm not going anywhere," he said firmly. "Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. You and Amara are my family now. You're my heart, and I will spend every day for the rest of my life proving to you that this is real, that this is forever." Before Elena could respond, Amara came running back from her exploration of the meadow, her arms full of wildflowers and her face glowing with pure joy. She dumped the flowers in Elena's lap, then used her hands to sign something that made Lorenzo's eyes widen with surprise. "What did she say?" Elena asked. Still learning the visual language that had become their family's special way of communicating. "She said the flowers are for the most beautiful mama in the world," Lorenzo translated, his voice soft with emotion, "and that she wants to draw a picture of our family having the best day ever." As they settled on the blanket, Elena marveled at how natural it felt. The three of them sharing food and conversation, Amara sketching everything around them with intense concentration, Lorenzo listening to every word Elena spoke like she was reciting poetry. The spread Lorenzo had prepared was incredible gourmet sandwiches with fresh mozzarella and tomatoes from his garden, pasta salad with herbs that made everything taste like sunshine, fresh berries that burst with sweetness, and cookies that made Amara's eyes light up with delight. After lunch, they spent an hour playing with the butterfly kite, taking turns running through the meadow, while Amara clapped her hands with silent laughter, and the colorful wings danced against the blue sky. Lorenzo proved to be surprisingly good at kite flying, his business-honed focus serving him well as he navigated wind currents with the patience of someone who understood that the best things in life required gentle persistence. When the wind died down, Amara settled onto the blanket with her art supplies, determined to capture the perfect day in pictures. She started with the kite, then moved on to detailed portraits of the wildflowers she had collected, her little tongue poking out in concentration as she tried to get the colors just right. "She's incredibly talented," Lorenzo murmured to Elena as they watched their daughter work. "Have you thought about getting her into formal art classes?" "I've thought about it," Elena admitted. "But before, well, art classes were a luxury we couldn't afford, and I always worried that pushing her too hard might make her retreat further into herself." "Art isn't about pushing," Lorenzo said quietly. "It's about giving her another way to express what's in her heart. There's a wonderful art studio in town that offers classes for children. The instructor is a friend of mine, actually. She's done some beautiful work for the hospital. I could introduce you if you'd like." The casual way he offered to expand Amara's world, to give her opportunities that Elena had only dreamed of providing, made her throat tight with gratitude. This was what security looked like. She realized not just financial security, though that was certainly part of it, but the security of having a partner who saw her daughter's potential and wanted to nurture it. "I'd like that very much," she managed to say. They made their way down to the lake, where a family of ducks was indeed swimming near the shore. Amara was enchanted, breaking off pieces of bread and throwing them into the water while using sign language to provide commentary on each duck's personality. She was pointing excitedly at a particularly graceful duck when disaster struck. The bank was muddier than it looked, and as Amara stepped closer to get a better view, her foot slipped on the wet rocks. She tumbled into the water with a splash that seemed to echo across the entire lake, immediately panicking in the waist-deep water. Elena's world tilted on its axis as she watched her daughter go under, precious seconds ticking by like hours as Amara struggled to find her footing on the slippery lake bottom. Elena lunged forward, but Lorenzo was faster, diving into the water without a moment's hesitation, his expensive clothes and Italian leather shoes forgotten in the face of Amara's need. He reached her in 3 powerful strokes, gathering her into his arms and lifting her clear of the water in one smooth motion. "I've got you," he was saying as he carried her toward shore, his voice steady and calm despite the fact that he was soaking wet and breathing hard from the surge of adrenaline. "You're safe now, little one. I've got you." By the time they reached the blanket, Elena was sobbing with relief, her hands shaking as she helped Lorenzo wrap Amara in every dry cloth they had brought. Amara was shivering and tearful, more from the shock of falling than from any real harm, but she clung to Lorenzo like he was her anchor in a storm. And then something miraculous happened, something that would change everything. Amara, still trembling in Lorenzo's arms, pulled back to look at him with eyes that held wonder and gratitude, and something that looked like recognition. For a moment, she just stared at him, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. And then, in a voice that was rusty from disuse but clear as crystal, she whispered the first word she had spoken in 2 years. "Thank you, Papa." The words hung in the air like magic, like prayer, like everything Elena had hoped for but been afraid to dream. Lorenzo's face crumpled with emotion as he realized what had just happened, what this precious child had just given him. But Amara wasn't finished. Still looking directly at Lorenzo, her small hands framing his face with the same tenderness he had always shown her, she continued in that sweet, rusty voice, "I love you, Papa Lorenzo." Then she turned to Elena, her eyes bright with tears and joy, and the kind of love that transcends words. "I love you, Mama Elena." And finally, with a wisdom that seemed far beyond her years, she added, "Don't leave me. Please don't ever leave me." The words shattered every remaining wall around Elena's heart. Here was her daughter, her precious, brave daughter, finding her voice again in a moment of pure love and trust. Here was Lorenzo, tears streaming down his face as he held them both, like they were made of starlight and dreams. "Never," Elena whispered, gathering both of them into her arms. "We will never leave you, sweetheart. We're a family now, forever and always." "Forever and always," Lorenzo echoed, his voice thick with tears and promises. "You are my daughter, Amara. You are both my heart, and I love you more than all the stars in the sky." As they sat there on their picnic blanket, wrapped in damp clothing and overwhelming joy, with Amara chattering softly about how this was the best day ever and how she wanted to draw Papa Lorenzo saving her like a hero in a fairy tale, Elena realized that she had finally found what she hadn't even known she was looking for. Not just safety, not just security, but a love so deep and true that it could bring back lost voices, heal broken hearts, and transform 3 wounded souls into one unbreakably strong family. That evening, after Amara had been bathed and fed and tucked into bed with a new story and the promise that tomorrow would bring more adventures, Elena found herself alone with Lorenzo on the terrace, overlooking the lake. "She spoke," Elena said softly, still barely believing it. After 2 years of silence, she spoke. "She called me Papa," Lorenzo replied, his voice full of wonder. "Me, a man who thought he'd never get to hear that word again. You saved her, Lorenzo, in every way that matters. You saved her." He turned to face her fully, his eyes intense with emotion. "No, Elena, you both saved me. Before you came into my life, I was just existing, just going through the motions. But you gave me purpose again, love again, hope again." Elena stepped closer, her heart pounding with the weight of everything she had been too afraid to say. "I love you," she whispered, the words tumbling out like a confession. "I love you, Lorenzo. I love the way you make Amara laugh, the way you jumped into that water without hesitation, the way you've given us a home that's about more than just safety." "Elena," he breathed, her name a prayer on his lips. "I love your kindness, your strength, the way you look at me like I'm something precious instead of something broken. I was so scared of falling in love again, but you made it impossible not to." Lorenzo stepped closer, his hands coming up to frame her face with infinite tenderness. "I love you too, Elena, more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. You and Amara are my family, my heart, my home." And then he kissed her soft and sweet and full of all the promises they were finally ready to make to each other. This kiss was different from their tentative first kiss weeks ago. This was a declaration, a commitment, a sealing of the vows they had spoken in a courthouse but were only now speaking with their hearts. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard and clinging to each other, Lorenzo smiled against her lips. "So," he said, his voice warm with love and just a touch of humor, "I guess this means our marriage of convenience just became a marriage of love." Elena laughed, the sound bright and free and full of the joy she had forgotten she was capable of feeling. "I guess it did," she agreed. "Though I have to say, falling in love with my husband has got to be the best plot twist of my entire life." "Mine too, Amore," he murmured, pulling her close. "Mine too." And as they stood there under the stars, wrapped in each other's arms and the promise of forever, Elena knew that their real love story was just beginning. Today had been about first words and brave declarations, but tomorrow would be about building a life together, one filled with laughter and love and the unshakable knowledge that they were exactly where they belonged. They were no longer just a family of convenience, brought together by circumstance and necessity. They were a family of choice, bound together by love and commitment, and the miracle of a little girl finding her voice again in the arms of the man who had become her papa in every way that mattered. Together, whole, and home at last. Chapter 6. Hearts Fully Opened. 3 months after the lake incident, Lorenzo announced, "We're going to Italy. My sister Giulia is getting married, and she's been asking to meet you both since I told her about our marriage." Elena nearly choked on her coffee. "Your sister? You have a sister?" "Giulia is 2 years younger than me," Lorenzo explained, his eyes warm with affection. "She's a pediatrician in Rome, which is probably why I'm so comfortable around children's hospitals. She's been wanting to meet my mysterious wife and daughter since the day I called to tell her I was married." "You told her about us?" Elena asked, surprised by how much that meant to her. "Of course I did," Lorenzo replied, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "Giulia is the only family I have left, and you two are, well, you're everything to me now." It was time she knew that her brother had finally found his way back to happiness. Amara, who had been listening with the intense focus she gave to all adult conversations, suddenly bounced in her chair. "Are we going to see where you grew up, Papa Lorenzo? Will there be real Italian pasta? Can I learn some Italian words?" The excitement in her voice was infectious, and Elena found herself caught up in the idea despite her nervousness about meeting Lorenzo's family. What if they didn't approve of his hasty marriage? What if they thought Elena was taking advantage of his generosity? What if— "Stop," Lorenzo said gently, apparently reading her thoughts with the uncanny accuracy he had developed over the past few months. "Giulia is going to love you both. She's been worried about me for years, thinking I'd never allow myself to be happy again. When I told her about you, she cried." "She cried?" Elena echoed. "Happy tears," Lorenzo clarified, his smile softening his entire face. "She said she could hear something in my voice that had been missing since Valentina died. Joy. Real, genuine joy. She can't wait to meet the woman who gave that back to me." The flight to Rome was Amara's first time on an airplane, and watching her press her face to the window as they soared above the Atlantic, her eyes wide with wonder as she signed rapid-fire descriptions of the clouds and ocean below, Elena felt a profound gratitude for the man who had made this possible. Lorenzo had booked them first-class seats that converted into beds, ensuring that Amara could sleep comfortably during the overnight flight. "Can't sleep?" he asked softly, noticing her restlessness. "Too excited, I think," Elena whispered back, not wanting to wake Amara, who was curled up in the seat across the aisle, still clutching the stuffed Italian flag that Lorenzo had bought her at the airport. "Or nervous," Lorenzo suggested with the gentle perceptiveness that never failed to catch her off guard. Elena sighed, abandoning any pretense. "What if they don't like me? What if they think you married beneath you?" Lorenzo turned in his seat to face her fully, his expression serious in the soft light. "Elena, do you remember what I told you about my grandmother? About recognizing your heart's home? My family understands that kind of love. They'll take one look at how happy you and Amara have made me, and they'll welcome you with open arms." He paused, then reached for her hand. "Besides, you're not meeting them as some stranger I've brought home. You're meeting them as my wife, the mother of my daughter, the woman I plan to spend the rest of my life loving. That makes you family automatically and irrevocably. The certainty in his voice sent a warm shiver down Elena's spine. In the 5 months since their wedding, they had grown closer than she had ever imagined possible. But hearing him speak so definitively about their future still took her breath away. "The rest of your life?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the quiet hum of the airplane engines. "Did I not make that clear?" Lorenzo asked, bringing her hand to his lips and pressing a soft kiss to her palm. "Elena Torres Vitale, I intend to love you until my last breath. And if there's anything after that, I'll love you there too." The words hung between them in the intimate darkness of the cabin, and Elena felt something shift deep in her chestnut, the careful, gradual opening she had been experiencing over the past months, but a sudden, complete surrender to the feelings she had been holding back. "I love you too," she whispered, and for the first time, she said it without fear, without reservation, without any part of her heart held in protective custody. "I love you with everything I am, everything I was, everything I ever hoped to be." When Lorenzo leaned across the narrow space between their seats to kiss her, Elena tasted salt on his lips and realized he was crying happy tears, just like his sister had shed when he told her about finding love again. They landed in Rome as the sun was rising, painting the ancient city in shades of gold and amber that made it look like something from a Renaissance painting. Julia was waiting for them at the airport, and Elena knew her immediately. She had the same storm-gray eyes as Lorenzo, the same elegant bone structure, and the same warm smile that could light up an entire room. "Lorenzo!" Julia cried, throwing her arms around her brother with the unself-conscious affection of someone who had clearly been waiting for this reunion for months. Then she turned to Elena and Amara, and her smile grew even brighter. "You must be Elena," she said in accented but perfect English, pulling Elena into a hug that felt like coming home. "And this beautiful little one must be Amara." Amara, who usually required time to warm up to new people, surprised everyone by stepping forward and offering Julia a shy smile. "Papa Lorenzo taught me to say ciao, bella in Italian," she announced proudly. "Ciao, bella yourself, little princess." Julia laughed, crouching down to Amara's level. "Would you like to learn some more Italian words? I know some very good ones for describing gelato." As they drove through the bustling streets of Rome toward the family vineyard in Tuscany, Elena watched Lorenzo transform before her eyes. The careful control he always maintained, the slight formality that was such an integral part of his personality, melted away as he pointed out landmarks to Amara and caught up with Julia about family news and mutual friends. This was Lorenzo in his natural element, surrounded by the people and places that had shaped him, and Elena fell in love with him all over again, seeing this relaxed, uninhibited version of the man she had married. The vineyard was everything she could have imagined, and moraling hills, covered with neat rows of grapevines, a villa that looked like it had been standing for centuries, and gardens that seemed to bloom with every flower known to humanity. Julia's fiancé, Luca, was a warm, laughing man who immediately challenged Amara to a game of soccer in the courtyard, while the adults settled in for aperitifs on the terrace. "She's perfect for you," Julia said quietly to Lorenzo, watching Elena chase Amara around the garden as the little girl shrieked with laughter. "I haven't seen you smile like this since." "Well, since before. She saved my life," Lorenzo replied simply. "Both of them did. I didn't even realize I was drowning until they threw me a lifeline." That evening, Julia insisted on cooking dinner for everyone, and Elena found herself in the villa's rustic kitchen, learning to make fresh pasta while Amara helped, by arranging herbs and asking approximately 1,000 questions about everything from why tomatoes were red to whether the chickens in the yard had names. "He talks about you constantly, you know," Julia said as they worked, her hands moving with the practiced ease of someone who had been making pasta since childhood. "Every phone call, every email. It's, Elena said this, and Amara did that. I was beginning to think he had invented you both." "Sometimes I think maybe we invented him," Elena confessed, watching Lorenzo through the window as he and Luca showed Amara how to feed the chickens. 5 months ago, I was a single mother, barely keeping my head above water. Now I'm married to a man who treats us like we're precious gifts he never expected to receive." "That's because you are," Julia said seriously, pausing in her kneading to look directly at Elena. "After Valentina died, Lorenzo stopped living. Oh, he went through the motions, worked, ate, slept, Even smiled when he thought someone was watching, but the light in his eyes was gone. I was so worried about him. She turned back to her pasta, but her voice remained thoughtful. The first time he called me after your wedding, I knew immediately that something had changed. He sounded like my brother again, not the ghost who had been walking around in his body for 3 years. That night, after Amara had fallen asleep in the room Julia had prepared especially for her, complete with a canopy bed and stuffed animals from Lorenzo's own childhood. Elena and Lorenzo walked through the vineyard under a canopy of stars that seemed brighter and closer than any she had ever seen. "This is where I learned about love," Lorenzo said, as they paused beside an ancient olive tree whose gnarled branches seemed to reach toward the heavens. "My grandparents, my parents, they all met their spouses here. Julia will be married here next month. It's a place where hearts recognize each other." "Is that what happened to us?" Elena asked, turning to face him in the moonlight. "Did our hearts recognize each other that day in the cathedral?" "I think so," Lorenzo replied, reaching up to trace the line of her cheek with his fingertips. "I think maybe our souls made an appointment to meet, and all the pain we went through was just getting us to the right place at the right time." When he kissed her this time, under the Tuscan stars, with the scent of jasmine and wine grapes perfuming the air around them, Elena felt something complete itself inside her chestnut healing that was still ongoing. But wholeness, the sense that all the broken pieces of her life had finally arranged themselves into something beautiful. "Lorenzo," she whispered against his lips. I need." "What do you need, my love?" he asked, his voice rough with desire and tenderness in equal measure. "You," she said simply. "All of you. Tonight." They made love for the first time in the room where Lorenzo had spent summers as a child, surrounded by family photographs and the lingering scent of his grandmother's lavender. It was everything Elena had dreamed it would be, and nothing like anything she had experienced before. Tender and passionate, desperate and patient, as if they had all the time in the world and no time at all. Afterward, as they lay entwined in the moonlight streaming through ancient windows, Lorenzo pressed his lips to her hair and whispered words in Italian that she didn't understand but felt in her bones. "What did you say?" she asked sleepily. "I said ti amo per sempre," he translated, his voice soft with wonder. "It means, I love you forever. But in Italian, it sounds like a promise, like something sacred." "Ti amo per sempre," Elena repeated carefully, testing the foreign words on her tongue. "Is that right?" "Perfect," Lorenzo murmured, pulling her closer. "Everything about you is perfect." As she drifted off to sleep in his arms, surrounded by the warmth of his family's acceptance and the promise of a love that felt strong enough to weather any storm, Elena realized that she had finally found what she hadn't even known she was looking for. Not just love, but belonging. Not just happiness, but home. And tomorrow, she would wake up as Mrs. Lorenzo Vitale. Not just in name, but in every way that mattered: body, heart, and soul. Chapter Sept. Creating Our Legacy. 8 months into their marriage, Elena woke on Christmas morning to find adoption papers under the tree. After months of legal proceedings, home visits, and court appearances, Lorenzo had officially become Amara's father. "It's final," Lorenzo said, watching her read, "As of yesterday, I am legally Amara's father. She's ours, Elena. No one can ever question that again." Elena looked up at him through tears that blurred her vision, remembering all the nights she had lain awake, worrying about what would happen to Amara if something happened to her, all the fears about custody battles and social services, and the 1,000 ways a single mother's security could crumble in an instant. "How?" she whispered. "I've been working with lawyers since August," Lorenzo explained, reaching out to wipe away the tears that were now flowing freely down her cheeks. "The process would normally take much longer, but when you have the resources to hire the best family attorneys in the state and a little girl who is very clear about what she wants, bureaucracy tends to move faster. What I want is Papa Lorenzo to be my real daddy forever," Amara announced matter-of-factly, climbing into Lorenzo's lap with the easy confidence of a child who had never doubted her place in his heart. "I told the judge that, and the nice lawyers, and everyone who asked. I told them Papa Lorenzo loves me more than chocolate, and Mama says that's the most love there is." Lorenzo's laugh was choked with tears as he held his daughter, his legal, official, permanent daughter, against his chest. "More than chocolate, More than anything in the entire universe, he confirmed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of wrapping paper and delighted squeals, but Elena found herself repeatedly drawn back to those adoption papers, to the official seal that made their family real in the eyes of the law. It wasn't that she had doubted Lorenzo's commitment, had proven his love for Amara in 1,000 ways over the past 8 months, but having it formalized, having the legal protection that meant no one could ever question his right to be her father, filled a void she hadn't even fully acknowledged. Later that afternoon, after Amara had fallen asleep surrounded by new art supplies and books and the elaborate dollhouse that Lorenzo had somehow had custom-made to look exactly like their home, Elena found him in his study, staring pensively out at the lake. "Thank you," she said simply, moving to stand beside his chair. "For what?" "For giving her security. For giving us both security. For making her yours in every possible way." Lorenzo turned in his chair to face her, reaching out to pull her down onto his lap. "Elena, she was already mine. The papers just make it official. From the moment I saw her standing beside you at that altar, scared and trying to be brave for her mama, she was my daughter. Biology doesn't make a father choice, does. Love does. Showing up every day does." "Is that what your father taught you?" Elena asked, settling more comfortably in his arms. "No," Lorenzo said quietly. "That's what I learned by not having a father who understood those things. My father loved me, but he was always working, always building his business, always convinced that providing for us financially was enough. He missed most of my childhood in pursuit of success." He was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing gentle patterns on her arm. "I swore that if I ever had children, I would be present for every moment I possibly could. I would know their dreams, their fears, their favorite foods, and least favorite chores. I would be the kind of father who showed up." "You are that kind of father," Elena said firmly. "Amara adores you. She lights up every time you walk into a room." "Because she's not afraid I'm going to disappear," Lorenzo replied. "Because she knows that when I say I'll be there, I will be. That's the greatest gift you can give a child who has already lost so much absolute certainty that the people who love her aren't going anywhere." As if summoned by their conversation about her, Amara appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes and clutching the new stuffed elephant that had quickly become her favorite gift. "Are you talking about me?" she asked with the directness that never failed to make both adults smile. "We're talking about how much we love you," Elena said, opening her arms so Amara could climb up and join their family cuddle. "I know," Amara said matter-of-factly, settling between them with the contentment of a child who had never doubted her place in the world. "You tell me every day, and you show me too." "How do we show you?" Lorenzo asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. Amara considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important questions. "Well, Mama always makes sure I eat vegetables, even when I don't want to, because she wants me to be healthy. And Papa Lorenzo reads me stories, even when he's tired from work, because he knows stories are important. And you both look at each other the way the married people do in movies. Like you're happy to be together." "Are we happy to be together?" Lorenzo asked Elena, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Very happy," Elena confirmed, leaning over to kiss him softly while Amara giggled. "See," Amara said triumphantly, "you love each other, and you love me, and I love both of you, and that makes us a real family. The adoption papers just make it so other people know it too." The wisdom in her words took both adults by surprise. At 7 years old, Amara had somehow understood something that many adults struggled with, that families were built with love and commitment, not just biology and legal documents. "You're absolutely right, sweetheart," Lorenzo said, holding both his girls close. "We're a real family, and nothing will ever change that." As they sat together in the comfortable quiet of the late afternoon, watching snow begin to fall outside the windows, Elena reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in less than a year. This time last Christmas, she had been working a double shift at the hospital, leaving Amara with a babysitter she couldn't really afford, struggling to give her daughter even a small taste of holiday magic. Now she was sitting in a room that looked like something from a fairy tale, with a man who loved them both unconditionally and a daughter who was finally, truly secure. It wasn't just that their circumstances had improved, though they certainly had, but that they had found something she had stopped believing in, the kind of love that transforms everything it touches, What are you thinking about? Lorenzo asked softly, noticing her contemplative mood. Last Christmas, Elena replied honestly. How different everything is. How different we are. Better different, he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. So much better, Elena confirmed. I used to think that surviving was enough, that keeping Amara safe and fed and reasonably happy was the best I could hope for. I never imagined that we could have this a real home, a real family, the kind of love that makes everything else possible. We're just getting started, Lorenzo said, his voice filled with quiet conviction. This is our foundation, but we're going to build something incredible on it. Years and years of holidays and birthdays and ordinary Tuesday afternoons that feel like gifts, because we're sharing them together. Amara, who had been listening to their conversation with the focused attention she gave to all adult discussions that involved her future, suddenly sat up straighter. Papa Lorenzo, she said seriously, will you still be my daddy when I'm grown up, even when I'm old like Mama? Hey, Elena protested with mock indignation. I'm not old, even when she's ancient like Mama. Lorenzo corrected with a grin that earned him a playful swat from Elena. I'll be your daddy when you're 7 and 17 and 70. I'll walk you down the aisle at your wedding, and I'll teach your children how to ride bikes, and I'll probably still be trying to convince you to eat your vegetables when you're 40. Promise? Amara asked, holding out her pinky finger. Promise, Lorenzo said solemnly, linking his finger with hers in the universal gesture of childhood vows. As Elena watched her husband and daughter seal their promise with the gravity that children brought to such rituals, she felt a peace settle in her chest that she had never experienced before. This was what security felt like, not just financial security, though that was certainly a relief, but emotional security. The bone-deep knowledge that the people you loved were committed to loving you back, not just for now, but forever. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing their world in pristine white that made everything look new and full of possibility. And inside, the three of them sat together, planning their future, a future that stretched out before them like an unwritten story, full of chapters they would create together, full of love they would build day by day, moment by moment, choice by choice. It was, Elena thought, as Amara finally drifted back to sleep in their arms, the most perfect Christmas gift she had ever received, the absolute certainty that their love story was just beginning. Chapter 8. Love Multiplied. February brought with it a discovery that would change their family forever, though it began with something as simple as Elena feeling unusually tired during what should have been a routine day. She had been working at the grief counseling center they had opened together. The culmination of months of planning and Lorenzo's generous funding, combined with her medical expertise and deep understanding of loss, the center was everything they had dreamed it would be: warm, welcoming space where children and families could find support, healing, and hope in the aftermath of tragedy. Elena loved the work, loved seeing children like the little girl whose mother had died in a car accident begin to smile again, loved watching teenagers who had lost siblings learn to carry their grief without being crushed by it. But lately, she had been struggling to keep up with her usual energy levels, finding herself exhausted by midday and fighting waves of nausea that she attributed to stress. It was Amara, with the uncanny perceptiveness that children sometimes possessed, who first voiced what Elena had been too afraid to consider. "Mama," she said one evening as they sat at the dinner table, "you look different." "Different how, sweetheart?" Elena asked, though she had noticed the changes herself, the way her clothes felt slightly tighter, the way certain smells made her stomach turn, the way she seemed to need more sleep than usual. "Like you have a secret inside you," Amara said seriously, tilting her head as she studied her mother's face. "Like you're growing something." Lorenzo looked up from his pasta, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth as he registered the implication of Amara's words. His eyes met Elena's across the table, and she saw her own dawning realization reflected there. "Growing something," Lorenzo repeated carefully. His voice neutral, but his eyes intense with hope and fear in equal measure. "Maybe," Elena whispered, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "Maybe I should probably take a test." The next morning, Elena stood in their bathroom, staring at 3 positive pregnancy tests, her heart racing with a mixture of joy and terror that threatened to overwhelm her completely. She and Miguel had struggled with fertility issues for years before Amara was conceived, and the doctors had warned her that another pregnancy might be difficult or even impossible. Yet here she was, carrying Lorenzo's child, carrying their child, and the miracle of it was almost too much to comprehend. "Elena?" Lorenzo's voice came through the bathroom door, gentle but concerned. "Are you all right? You've been in there for 20 minutes. With trembling hands, Elena opened the door to find him standing in their bedroom, already dressed for work but clearly unwilling to leave without knowing she was okay. He took one look at her face, at the tears streaming down her cheeks, and the pregnancy test she held like a precious treasure, and his knees actually buckled. "Really?" he whispered, reaching out to brace himself against the doorframe. "Really," Elena confirmed, holding up the test with hands that shook with overwhelming emotion. "We're having a baby, Lorenzo. You're going to be a father again." The sound he made was somewhere between a laugh and a sob as he crossed the space between them in 2 quick strides, gathering her into his arms and spinning her around the bedroom while she laughed and cried, and held on to him like an anchor in a storm of pure joy. "I can't believe it," he kept saying, setting her down carefully and immediately placing both hands on her stomach, as if he could somehow sense the tiny life growing there. "After Valentina and Lucia, I thought, I never imagined I would get another chance to be a father from the very beginning." "Are you happy?" Elena asked, though the answer was written clearly across his face in the form of the biggest smile she had ever seen him wear. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Lorenzo replied, cupping her face in his hands and kissing her with such tenderness that she felt her heart might burst from the sheer intensity of his love. "You've given me everything, Elena first Amara. And now this. You've made me believe in miracles again." They told Amara together that evening, sitting her down in the living room with the same seriousness they might have used to discuss any other major family decision. "Amara, we have something very important to tell you," Elena began, taking her daughter's hands in hers. "Are we moving?" Amara asked, her eyes widening with concern. "Are you and Papa Lorenzo getting divorced? Because Mia at school said her parents sat her down like this before they told her they were splitting up." "No, sweetheart," Lorenzo said quickly, moving to sit on Amara's other side. "We're not moving, and we're definitely not getting divorced. We're telling you because you're going to be a big sister." For a moment, Amara just stared at them, processing this information with the careful deliberation she brought to all major revelations. Then, slowly, a smile began to spread across her face until it rivaled the sun for brightness. "A baby," she whispered, as if speaking too loudly might somehow make it untrue. "A baby," Elena confirmed, placing Amara's small hand on her stomach. "Your little brother or sister is growing right here, and they'll be born sometime in the fall." What happened next was something Elena would remember for the rest of her life. Amara leaned down and placed her ear against Elena's stomach, listening intently as if she might be able to hear something. "Hi, baby," she whispered to Elena's belly, her voice filled with such love and wonder that both adults felt tears spring to their eyes. "I'm your big sister, Amara, and I'm going to teach you everything. I'm going to teach you how to draw and how to sign and how to make Papa Lorenzo laugh, and I'm going to love you so much that you'll never be scared of anything." Lorenzo reached over and pulled both his girls into his arms, holding them close as they celebrated the miracle that was growing inside Elena's body. In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of his family's love, he felt a completeness that he had never experienced before, not even in his first marriage, which had been built on different foundations. This love, this family, felt like destiny finally fulfilled. Elena's pregnancy progressed normally at first, but during her second trimester, her blood pressure began climbing. Her doctor recommended reduced activity and frequent monitoring. "I'm worried," Elena admitted one evening, her hand on her growing belly. "The doctor says it's manageable," Lorenzo replied, covering her hand with his. "We're monitoring everything carefully. You and the baby are going to be fine." The months of careful monitoring were challenging but brought unexpected closeness. Amara took her big sister role seriously, and Lorenzo worked from home whenever possible to stay close. "He's going to be so lucky," Elena said one afternoon as she lay on the sofa while Amara practiced piano in the next room, the sweet melody drifting through the house like a promise of peace. "Why?" Lorenzo asked, looking up from the laptop where he was reviewing contracts. Because he's going to grow up knowing what real love looks like, Elena replied, watching the way Lorenzo's face softened whenever he looked at her, the way he unconsciously reached for her hand during conversations, the way he made her feel cherished, even when she was cranky and uncomfortable and worried about everything. We all are, Lorenzo said, closing his laptop and moving to sit beside her, pulling her feet into his lap so he could massage away the aches that came with carrying their child. We're all going to grow up learning what it means to love without reservation, to choose each other every single day, to build something beautiful from the pieces of our broken hearts. As he rubbed her swollen feet and their baby moved restlessly beneath her ribs and Amara's music filled their home with joy, Elena felt a profound gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this moment. All the pain, all the loss, all the fear, it had all led them here, to this love that was strong enough to create new life and brave enough to believe in happy endings. Their son was going to be born into a family that understood the preciousness of every moment, the importance of showing up for each other, and the miracle of love that transforms everything it touches. And as spring turned to summer and her due date approached, Elena knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them the way they faced everything now together, with hearts wide open and love leading the way. Chapter 18. Promises renewed. The morning of their first anniversary dawned with the kind of perfect September weather that made believing in happy endings feel effortless. Elena stood at their bedroom window, 8 months pregnant and radiant in the early sunlight, watching Lorenzo and Amara set up chairs in the garden below for the intimate vow renewal ceremony they had planned. It had been Amara's idea, actually 3 months earlier, as they sat around the breakfast table discussing anniversary plans. She had looked up from her cereal with the matter-of-fact wisdom that always caught them off guard. "You should get married again," she had announced, "but this time, I want to be in the wedding. And this time, it should be because you want to, not because someone was mean to Mama." Lorenzo had choked on his coffee while Elena stared at their daughter in amazement. Sometimes, it was easy to forget that beneath Amara's sunny disposition and artistic soul lay a remarkably perceptive mind that understood far more than they gave her credit for. "You want us to have another wedding?" Elena had asked, intrigued by the idea despite herself. "Not another wedding," Amara had corrected, "the same wedding, but better with flowers and music and everyone who loves us and cake, definitely cake." Now, watching the two most important people in her world work together to create something beautiful, Elena felt her heart swell with such overwhelming love that she had to brace herself against the window frame. The baby, as if sensing her emotional state, gave a strong kick that made her laugh out loud. "Settle down in there, little one," she murmured, running her hands over her rounded belly. "We have a big day ahead of us." The ceremony was scheduled for late afternoon, when the light would be perfect for the photographs that Julia had insisted on taking during her visit from Italy. Their guest list was small but meaningful. Julia and Luca, who had flown in specifically for the celebration. Dr. Flound, Catherine Hayes, Elena's former supervisor from the hospital, who had become a dear friend. Mrs. Harper, whose eyes always filled with tears whenever she talked about how happy the family had become, and a few of the children from Lorenzo's Thursday reading group, whose families had become part of their extended circle of love. "Mama, you need to get ready." Amara burst into the bedroom, her cheeks flushed with excitement, and her arms full of flowers from the garden. "Aunt Julia says we have exactly 3 hours to make you the most beautiful bride who ever existed." Elena laughed, allowing herself to be swept along by her daughter's enthusiasm. The dress she had chosen was nothing like the elaborate gown she had worn to her first disastrous wedding. This one was simple but elegant flowing cream silk that accommodated her pregnancy beautifully, with delicate beadwork that caught the light when she moved. Julia had brought antique pearl earrings that had belonged to their grandmother, and Amara had woven baby's breath and roses from their garden into a crown that was perfectly imperfect, just like their family. "You look like a fairy tale princess," Amara breathed when Elena was finally ready, her dark eyes wide with admiration. "Papa Lorenzo is going to cry." "Do you think so?" Elena asked, adjusting the flower crown that Amara had created with such careful attention to detail. "Oh yes," Amara nodded solemnly. "He cries every time he looks at you, like you're the most beautiful thing he's ever seen." Which is a lot. Elena felt her own eyes fill with tears at her daughter's observation. It was true, over the past year, she had often caught Lorenzo looking at her with an expression of such profound love and gratitude that it took her breath away, as if he still couldn't quite believe that she was real, that they were real, that love had found them when they least expected it. The ceremony itself was everything. Their courthouse wedding hadn't been full of joy and intention and the presence of people who loved them. Lorenzo, devastatingly handsome in a perfectly tailored navy suit, stood beneath an arch of climbing roses with tears already shining in his eyes as Elena walked toward him, her hand resting gently on Amara's shoulder, as their daughter served as both flower girl and maid of honor. "Dearly beloved, Dr. Hayes began, her voice warm with affection as she officiated the ceremony that would make their marriage feel complete. "We are gathered here today to witness the renewal of vows between two people who have already proven that love can triumph over loss, that hope can flourish in the darkest soil, and that families are built not just through blood, but through choice, commitment, and the daily decision to choose each other." When it came time for vows, Lorenzo spoke first. "Elena, 1 year ago, we were both broken, both convinced our best days were behind us. You gave me Amara, purpose, and now our son growing inside you. I promised to love you beyond death itself, to show up for every moment, and to be the husband and father our family deserves." Elena's voice was clear despite her tears. "Lorenzo, you didn't just marry me. You saw worth in my broken pieces. You taught Amara to trust again, and me to hope again. I promise to love you with fierce devotion, to be your partner in this beautiful life we've built, and to choose our family every day, forever." When Dr. Hayes pronounced them husband and wife again, and for always, Lorenzo's kiss tasted of tears and promises, and the kind of love that transforms everything it touches. The small gathering erupted in applause and cheers, but Elena was only aware of Lorenzo's arms around her, Amara hugging both their legs, and the baby moving restlessly as if he too was celebrating. The reception that followed was intimate and perfect, with tables set up in their garden under string lights that twinkled like captured stars. Amara performed the song she had written for the occasion, her clear voice soaring over the gentle murmur of conversation as she sang about families that find each other and love that lasts forever. But it was Lorenzo's speech that left everyone in tears, including several of the tough teenagers from the grief counseling center who had never seen two adults love each other with such obvious joy. "A year ago," he began, rising from his seat with a champagne glass in his hand, "I thought my story was over. I thought the best parts of my life were just memories, that happiness was something that happened to other people, to people who were braver or luckier or more deserving than I was." He looked around at their gathered friends and family, his gaze finally settling on Elena and Amara with an expression that made every heart in the garden melt. But real love doesn't follow the timeline we think it should. Sometimes it comes disguised as the worst day of your life. Sometimes it arrives in the form of a woman in a wedding dress who needs someone to believe in her strength, and a little girl who needs someone to show her that not all men leave. Lorenzo's voice grew thick with emotion as he continued. "Elena and Amara didn't just save my life. They gave me a life worth living. They taught me that healing isn't about forgetting the past, but about being brave enough to build a future. They showed me that love isn't something you find once and lose forever. It's something you choose every day in 1,000 small ways." He raised his glass higher, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "So here's to my wife, who is the strongest, most beautiful, most extraordinary woman I have ever known. Here's to my daughter, who reminds me daily that courage comes in many forms, including the form of an 8-year-old girl who decided to trust a stranger with her heart. And here's to the son who is on his way, who will grow up knowing that he is the product of a love so deep and true that it literally created new life from the ashes of old grief." The toast that followed was thunderous, but Elena barely heard it over the sound of her own heart beating in perfect rhythm with the two hearts that belonged to her completely. As Lorenzo sat back down beside her, pulling both her and Amara into his arms, she felt their son kick strongly, as if he was adding his own celebration to the evening's joy. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Vitale," Lorenzo whispered against her ear, his voice full of promises for all the anniversaries still to come. "Happy anniversary, Mr. Vitale," she whispered back, knowing that this moment surrounded by love, carrying their child, watching Amara dance with Julia under the stars, was just the beginning of their real love story, the one that would unfold day by day, year by year, choice by choice, until they were old and gray and still choosing each other with the same passion that had brought them together on the worst and best day of both their lives. Chapter 10. The moment love conquers all. The contractions began at 3 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday in October, just 2 weeks before Elena's due date. What started as mild discomfort quickly escalated into something that had Lorenzo calling their doctor while Elena gripped the bathroom counter, her breathing sharp and focused as she worked through waves of pain that seemed to come faster and harder with each passing minute. "It's too early," she managed to say between contractions, fear creeping into her voice as Lorenzo helped her back to bed. "Babies have their own schedules," Lorenzo replied, his voice calm despite the worry she could see in his eyes. "And our son has already proven he's as impatient as his mother." They had planned for this moment. Meticulously, the hospital bag had been packed for weeks. Mrs. Harper was on standby to stay with Amara, and they had toured the maternity ward so many times that Elena could find her way to the delivery room blindfolded. But as another contraction gripped her with startling intensity, she realized that no amount of preparation could have readied her for the reality of bringing their child into the world. The drive to the hospital was a blur of Lorenzo's steady voice, talking her through each contraction, while Mrs. Harper sat in the back seat with the sleepy Amara, who had insisted on coming to help her baby brother be born. "I want to be there when he arrives," Amara had declared with the determination that had become her trademark. "He needs to know his big sister loves him from the very first moment." By the time they reached the maternity ward, Elena's contractions were coming every 2 minutes, and the medical team that had been monitoring her high-risk pregnancy throughout the final months immediately took charge. Dr. Rivera, the maternal-fetal specialist who had become not just their doctor but a trusted friend, met them at the elevator with a calm efficiency that was both reassuring and terrifying. "Elena, we're going to take excellent care of you and this baby," Dr. Rivera said as they wheeled her toward the delivery room. "But I need you to know that your blood pressure is elevated, and we're going to have to monitor both of you very carefully." The next 6 hours passed in a haze of pain, fear, and overwhelming love. Lorenzo never left her side, holding her hand through contractions that seemed to tear through her body with increasing ferocity, wiping her face with cool cloths, and whispering words of encouragement that kept her anchored when the pain threatened to pull her under. Amara, deemed old enough by the hospital staff to be present for her brother's birth, sat in a chair beside the bed with a sketch pad, drawing what she called happy pictures for the baby, while providing a running commentary that somehow managed to keep everyone's spirits up despite the mounting tension in the room. "He's going to have Papa Lorenzo's eyes," she announced during one of Elena's brief respites between contractions. "I can tell because he's already being stubborn like Papa." "I am not stubborn," Lorenzo protested with mock indignation, earning a weak laugh from Elena. "You married Mama after knowing her for 2 hours," Amara pointed out with 8-year-old logic. "That's definitely stubborn. Good stubborn, but still stubborn." But as the afternoon wore on, what had begun as a difficult but manageable labor began to take a dangerous turn. Elena's blood pressure continued to climb despite medication, and the baby's heart rate started showing signs of distress that had the medical team exchanging worried glances over her head. "Elena," Dr. Rivera said gently during a brief lull between contractions, "we need to talk about the possibility of a cesarean section. The baby is in some distress, and your blood pressure is reaching levels that concern us." Elena nodded weakly, too exhausted to argue with medical expertise, but she could see the fear in Lorenzo's eyes as he processed the implications of emergency surgery. She knew he was thinking about Valentina, about losing a wife and child in one devastating moment, about all the ways that childbirth could steal everything that mattered in the space of a heartbeat. "Whatever keeps them both safe," Lorenzo said, his voice steady despite the terror she could read in his expression. "Whatever you need to do." The decision was made when Elena's blood pressure spiked dangerously during a contraction, requiring emergency surgery. As she was rushed to the operating room, Elena felt herself losing consciousness. "Stay with us, Mrs. Vitali," the doctor called, but darkness was pulling her under. Outside the operating room, Lorenzo held Amara while they waited in terrifying silence. "Mama has to be okay," Amara whispered. Our family isn't finished yet. Come back to us, Lorenzo whispered to the closed doors. Please, Elena, come back. When the surgeon emerged an hour later with their healthy son and news that Elena was stable, Lorenzo's knees nearly buckled with relief. In recovery, Elena's eyes fluttered open to see Lorenzo's tear-streaked face above hers. You came back, he whispered. I heard you calling, she replied weakly. Amara carefully placed the baby in Elena's arms. Mama, mate Matteo Luca. He's perfect. As Elena looked at her son, at his dark hair like Lorenzo's, at tiny fingers already reaching, her heart expanded beyond measure. He's beautiful, she whispered. Lorenzo kissed her forehead, then touched Matteo's hand. You are my miracle. Both of you. You scared me, but you came back to us. Amara curled up beside Elena. Now our family is complete. In that moment, with Matteo's hand around her finger, Amara warm against her side, and Lorenzo's love surrounding them, Elena knew their love had reached its perfect crescendo strong enough to weather any storm life might bring.